Hello, my name is Ann O'Mara, and I'm the Executive Director for the Healthcare Advocacy and Leadership Organization, otherwise known as HALO. HALO exists to promote, protect, and advocate for the rights of the medically vulnerable. With me today, I have Mary Kellet, who is the Executive Director of Prenatal Partners for Life, a group of concerned parents, most of whom have or have had a special needs child, medical professionals, legal professionals, and clergy whose aim is to support, inform, and encourage expectant or new parents. Mary, we're here today to talk about your son Peter, who shortly after birth was diagnosed with trisomy 18 and sadly passed away a few years ago at the age of 6.5. I know, Mary, that Peter brought so much love and joy into your family's life. Can you tell me what Peter was like?
Well, Peter, he had a condition called trisomy 18, and that is similar to Down syndrome, which is trisomy 21, but more severe. And so when I was 19 weeks pregnant with Peter, they found some markers on an ultrasound, and they were concerned that he had this condition, trisomy 18, and I had never heard about it before, but the doctor recommended that we get an amniocentesis done. And we said we didn't want to do that because I know there are risks and we didn't want to take the chance of hurting our baby. And he said, well, you don't understand, if your baby has this, he won't live beyond 2 weeks, and nobody carries these babies to term. And he said, if you have an amnio, you'll have more choices. And so I said, oh, if you mean abortion, that's not going to be a choice for us. We'll never end the life of our child. And he said, well, nobody carries these babies to term. And he kept on emphasizing that, he's not going to live anyway. If he makes it to birth, he won't live beyond 2 weeks. And we just said, we're going to embrace his little life. And we did. And he was born early at 33 weeks, and they did an emergency C-section. He had slowed down in the womb quite a bit. And after he was born, they gave him great care up until day 2 of his life, when a test came back saying he did have trisomy 18. And at that point, it was recommended that we stop all treatment. The doctor said we can wrap him in a blanket, and I think we should just let him go. And we said, well, we want to help our son like we had helped, any of our other children. In the meantime, our daughter went on the internet, and she called me at the hospital, and she said, Mom, there are lots of kids living beyond 2 weeks with trisomy 18. There are even some adults. And I said, well, print off those stories and bring them to the hospital. So the next time the doctor came in, I handed him these stories, and I said, why did you lie to me? There are lots of people living with this. And he, was uncomfortable, and he said, we have to think about resources. And Peter will never contribute to society, and he'll be a horrible burden to your family. And our recommendation is that you stop treatment, and we'll make him comfortable as he dies. And probably the saddest conversation, or one of the saddest, was with a woman doctor who I'd never met before. She came into my hospital room, and she said, I want to talk to you about Peter. She said, but I want to talk to you as a mother, not as a doctor. She said, I'm a mom. And she said, I'm telling you, you just have to let Peter go. She said, you can't bring this child home into your family. It's not fair to your other kids. Your life is going to be nothing but going to doctor's appointments in the hospital. And he's going to be a horrible burden to your family. And I just sat and cried. But I remember thinking, Peter was our 11th child. I didn't go anywhere anyway, so that really didn't matter. But we insisted that he receive the normal medical care anybody else would get. And he came home to our family. And, they kept on telling us he's going to die, be prepared, he's going to die, he's not going to live. Well, he just grew and grew, and he was so happy and sweet. And, he learned to eat by mouth. They said he would never do that, but he did. He took a little bottle, and I would pump my breast milk, and he ate food. He ate, ice cream and pudding. He loved sweet stuff, just like any kid. He had a sweet little personality. He was very happy and sweet. He loved his brothers and sisters, and they loved him to pieces. Any one of them would tell you he was never a burden, but the favorite, little person in our family who everybody gravitated towards and who everybody, wanted to hold all the time and love. And his physical therapist said, you guys have to put him down more because he was constantly in somebody's arms, constantly being played with, constantly just loved. And, he knew us. He loved us. They said he's never going to know you. He's not going to do this or that. And it was just so negative, overwhelmingly negative. Nobody ever said anything positive. Like, this is your child and you can love your baby no matter what the condition or diagnosis is. But he was a great gift. Every day, we had with him was a gift. And I think all the kids and my husband, we would say he was, the greatest gift we've ever been given besides our faith. And we loved him tremendously, and he loved all of us too. He just was a beautiful little boy. He loved praise and worship music. He loved to pray. He loved reading the Bible. He loved life. He did. And I think, if that is the measure of a good life, being loved and loving, he had a wonderful life.
Mary, that is so beautiful. And just in your voice, I can hear how much love and joy he brought to you and your family.
He did.
That's beautiful. Mary, I know that Peter passed away at the young age of 6.5. Can you tell us what led to his death?
Well, unfortunately, Peter's death was much like his life, where we had to fight for care. He died after having his appendix removed. And after the surgery, the surgeon came out and said he did great and that, he fully expected him to go home in a few days. Well, the next day we saw his abdomen getting bigger and bigger, and I had seen the doctor pressing very, very hard on his incision site, and I questioned him about it, and he got mad at me and snapped at me and said he was checking for infection. Well, Peter's abdomen was bigger and bigger, and we asked if he could be internally bleeding. They said no. The doctor did an ultrasound himself, said it was air. Well, all of a sudden, all his alarms went off, and they said he died. And I was there, and my husband had left, and I said, well, can you keep doing chest compressions until my husband gets back? And when my husband walked in the room, he said, what happened? And the doctor said, well, his heart just couldn't take it, and he died from infection. And they asked if we wanted an autopsy, but because of numerous instances, we didn't have a lot of trust with these doctors, just so many times of being in the hospital and things happening. So we said no. And it was actually when we were planning Peter's funeral, and the funeral director said, how did your son die? And we said, well, he died after having his appendix removed. And she said, oh my gosh, you don't hear that very often. And we said, well, he had special needs. And she said, well, still, she said, did you have an autopsy? And we said, no, we don't really trust the doctors there. And she said, well, you can have an independent autopsy done. And she said, I would, recommend that just for your own peace. And so we did. We called another county, and the coroner, she cautioned us that, she doesn't, many times she finds nothing wrong. And we said, we hope you find nothing wrong. We hope that you don't find anything, suspicious, that it's all as they said. Well, she called us back a couple hours later, and she said she was shocked by what she found. She said, your son had a liter of blood in his abdomen, and that he bled to death. And I remember crying, saying, "Are you telling me Peter didn't have to die?" And she said, "Yes, I'm telling you, Peter didn't have to die. He bled to death." And she suggested we call a lawyer. And so we did. We talked to 3 lawyers. They all agreed there was malpractice involved. And but none of them wanted to go up against this big hospital. We did have a meeting with the hospital with, many of the doctors, and the surgeon said, "I told you after Peter's surgery that he was probably not going to make it." And we just looked at each other because that's not what he said. And we had a Catholic priest with us. And so after this meeting, which was filled with just a lot of lies, a lot of misinformation, the coroner did come with us to that meeting. They had her in tears. They just were so disrespectful and rude to her, questioning her medical ability and if she knew what blood was. And I mean, it was horrible the way they treated her. And so she left in tears. But after this meeting, we called the priest who was with us and we said, "Father, what do you remember about that surgeon saying to us?" And he said, "Well, I remember exactly what you said, that he was going to be okay." He said, "I would never have left you," because he left then. Everybody thought, "Oh, Peter did great, according to the surgeon." But at that meeting, he lied to us. The funny thing is, after all of this, we found out how he died. I told my story to a state senator in Minnesota down at the Capitol. And he had a lawyer with him. And this lawyer was the Minnesota Hospital Association's lawyer formerly. He didn't work for them at this point when I told my story, but he used to. And he asked where Peter died. And he said, at that hospital, he said, they have something called an internal futility of care policy. And I believe that's why Peter died. And he said, "I think somebody thought it was just time to let Peter go, like they had been saying ever since he was born." And this internal futility of care policy, hardly anybody at that hospital, other doctors, nurses, knew about. Only these few who took care of these kids. And the senator, he wrote up a bill called the Minnesota Hospital Disclosure Futility Disclosure Policy. And basically what it said is that if the hospital has these policies, that they have to make that known to the public. And he even had other doctors coming to his office who worked at that hospital saying, "We don't have this. What is this bill about?" They didn't know about it. Only a few of their specialized doctors knew about it. But anyway, so they wrote a bill, and I went to testify telling Peter's story, saying that, I believed that he was a victim of this futility policy. It passed both the House and Senate and would have been signed into law, but Dayton refused to sign it. It was attached to another bill, and he did not sign it. So we're going to try again. But many of these hospitals do have these futility of care policies, and the public does not know about them. I really think it all comes down to the whole attitude at the beginning of his life, the resources, the money, people, physicians, and other medical professionals not being able to see the gift and the value of these kids. And, they might have thought, "Oh, Peter's going to die anyway shortly." But I can tell you that we would have been happy and so grateful to have any more time with him. That's one of the lessons he taught us, the gift of every minute, the gift of every day. If they thought he was going to die in a week or two, we would have taken that week or two. And my prayer was always that he would die at home in our arms and not in a hospital surrounded by people who never valued his life. And it didn't work out that way. But, his work continues, and we will just keep going, trying to proclaim the gift of lives like little Peter. And hopefully the doctors and the nurses who take care of these kids will see their value and give them the best care possible, and not cooperate with evil like this. I think there were many doctors who knew about this policy and maybe didn't participate directly into it, but knew about it and didn't do anything about it. So we have to stand up for evil, stand up to fight it and
Mary,
not be afraid.
I'm sorry, Mary. When you tell your Peter story, my heart just breaks for you, and I can't imagine going through something like that. Also, it sounds like along the way you received a lot of incomplete, inaccurate information, and even outright lies from some physicians. And I know you talked about the lies, in the last meetings that you had, but anything else you would like to share about that?
Oh, so many lies throughout his life. In the beginning, we were told he had a fatal heart defect by the head of the NICU department at the hospital where he was born. And, not to treat him, not to help him, let him go. His heart is, fatally flawed. He's not going to live. Well, I just knew that doctor was lying to me. And so we went on our own to contact a pediatric cardiologist, and he just shook his head and said, "Who told you his heart was, fatally flawed, that he's going to die?" And he just shook his head. He said, "No." He said he's got, some problems with his heart. He said, but all in all, it's stable and functional. And he needed a 20-minute procedure called a PDA ligation, which, they do every day. We were told it was open heart surgery. Again, he just shook his head. No, it's not open heart surgery. He said it's a 20-minute, very simple procedure. It'll help him.
So it was a simple procedure, and they referred to it as open heart surgery?
Right. Yeah. Oh, he's not going to survive that. I mean, it was all an agenda on their part not to treat these kids. Parents are pressured before birth, and if they refuse abortion, they're pressured after birth not to offer them the care that would help them. And I'm not talking about futile care. I'm talking about things that you would do for any other kid, to help them live. I mean, it's really discrimination. It's discrimination, and we felt that a lot. Another time he went to the hospital, he had RSV, which is a virus that kids who are preemies can get, and it can become, problematic. And we brought him in, and they said, yeah, he's got pneumonia, and they tested for RSV. He had that. Well, what do you want to do? Well, we want to help him. Yeah, and we said, what would you do for our other kids? Well, we'd put them on antibiotics, give them, help with their breathing. And we said, well, that's what we want you to do with Peter. And that doctor left, came back with another physician, and they both said, we can't believe you want to put Peter through this. Like what helping him is, they made it seem like helping him was just not the right thing to do. It was always termed as aggressive. We can't believe you want this aggressive care. Well, it's not aggressive. How can it be aggressive care for Peter when it's not aggressive care for our other child? We want you to help him, okay, like you would help our other kids. And, so they did. And, Peter got better and came home. But it was always this kind of, we had to prove something to them. And, I understand. I understand they're oftentimes in difficult situations and under pressure, probably from different sources. But, I really wish that they would just see beyond what they think they know, because they don't know that much about kids and families with these conditions. And I just think there has to be a lot more education about the way physicians talk to families, about the way physicians listen to families, and
Mary,
the treatment they provide.
As you talked about physicians, I think one thing that struck me and makes me really sad is the fact that not just one doctor lied to you, gave you bad advice, bad information, but just so many different doctors did the
Yeah.
same thing. And I think that's really what's heartbreaking to me.
Well, it's a environment, I think, that's, present. Um, we became involved with the Catholic Medical Association and just went to many of their conferences with our materials. And, it was really healing for me because there are very, very good doctors out there. There are doctors who value life, and there are doctors who will stand up for these kids. And more and more, as these kids prove that they can, live and thrive, um, more and more doctors are, willing to try things and treating them. But one physician came up to me and she said, listening to you and your story is very heartbreaking. And she was a hospitalist, a doctor who works in a hospital. And she said, but you should hear the way some of them talk about these kids. She said, it's heartbreaking to us doctors who value their lives. She said, it's just really, really hard. So, we pray for the doctors and the nurses and all medical professionals. And, we have forgiven the doctors that were involved with Peter's death. I do believe the truth will come out someday about it all because Peter is not the only child at this hospital. I do believe that, the truth has to come out for the good of everyone. Lies and deception and hastening children's deaths, that's not good medical care. Um, but we have forgiven them. We pray for them. And we pray for all doctors. And we have a good relationship with many, many medical professionals.
And Mary, as I listen to you, I think what a beautiful gift Peter was in your life. And I have to think Peter's looking down and just so proud of you and your family for, fighting to prevent this from happening to other families. So thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, he's our little saint in heaven now.
Mary, I wanted to ask what you learned from your experience with Peter, and would you do anything differently today?
Well, we learned so much. And we called him our little teacher. That was his nickname. Our little teacher. He taught us so much. And, he never spoke. He could kind of sing and make little sounds. And, every now and then we'd think he said like mama or dada or something. But, he never could speak full sentences or anything. But yet he taught us so much. And I think, the main thing he taught us was the gift of every life. Peter didn't contribute in an economical way to society, like the doctor, I think, was thinking. But Peter contributed in a much more profound and important way than that by helping all of us become better people and by softening our hearts, by teaching us about unconditional love for others, because that's what he lived. He lived unconditionally, just loving everyone, all the time. He taught us about unselfishness, the gift of every moment, the gift of time, because we didn't know how long he was going to be with us, and so we treasured every day.
And Mary, I especially like how you called him the little teacher. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and just about compassion, and about suffering, that there's a value there. That we're all gonna suffer in some ways, and I think the doctors oftentimes have this misplaced compassion, thinking they're going to save a family from suffering by taking care of these kids, but they're missing out on all the other important things that these kids bring to a family, and all the other important things that they teach us. And I call these kids teachers of our souls. And that's exactly what they are. They help us become better people. And And the world needs that. That's exactly what the world needs, is more compassion and more love, and that unconditional love where you can look at a person and love them as God loves them. And that's what Peter did.
Hey, Mary, I love how you said that, children like Peter bring so much love into the world and that the world needs more compassion and more love.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you want to tell other people who might be facing a similar situation?
Well, there's a lot of fear, and that's mainly, what we deal with. Because oftentimes nothing positive is said. And so what we try to do at Prenatal Partners for Life is help families embrace the life of their baby and let God be the author of their life, not to end their life, not to, not treat them, but help their child reach their full potential, like they would to any of their other kids. And don't let fear stop you from seeing through to the gift of your child, because your child is still a great gift, and in many ways a more profound gift than if they wouldn't have any condition, because you're really going to grow if you allow that process to happen, and not be afraid to love them and not be afraid to help them. And so I would say hang on to hope and don't let fear overcome your love for your baby or your child.
That is such a beautiful message for today's world. Are there any other final thoughts, Mary, that you have about Peter or advice maybe that you want to give to others?
Well, I would just say, if you are going to a physician who is recommending or pressuring, that you end the life of your baby, and if they, after you say no, keep on pressuring, you need to switch gears and find a doctor who will love you and your baby and treat you and your baby both. And also after birth, if you find doctors who are not willing to give your child the proper care, to find doctors who will. And we have a huge support group of parents. And so there's a lot of great information out there. And thankfully, many physicians are coming around seeing that, hey, if you do help these kids, they can live and they can thrive. So, we know many, many older children with trisomy 18. Some have very short lives. They have major things wrong with their hearts or other organs, but some don't. And so they might need, some special care in the beginning. But, it's just embracing the life and helping that child reach its potential, whatever that is.
Mary, you mentioned the other families who have children with the same condition, and I visualize or imagine that those children brought the same amount of love into their families as well.
Oh, yes.
And so I'm so glad that you're sharing your story today.
Well, you know what? It doesn't, families whose kids live minutes or hours or families whose kids live much longer, they all have the same story, that they are so grateful for these kids. I mean, these kids are a gift, and not just with trisomy 18. We help families with any condition. Every life is precious. Every life has a plan and a purpose. Is created by God in His image. And that's really what we try to get across, that message too, that no matter what your baby has, no matter what the prognosis is, this child is made in God's image, and He has got a plan and a purpose, and just trust Him, and there's hope. And so don't give up.
Okay. Mary, you mentioned that you have several other children. Can you talk about how they reacted to Peter's death?
Well, they were all devastated by his death. I think part of what was so hard is we were under the impression that, from the surgeon that, everything went well and he was going to be okay. And so, everybody, just kind of felt that, that was how it was going to be, and they weren't worried or anything. So when all Peter's alarms went off, and my husband rushed back up to the hospital. The 4 youngest kids followed him back to the hospital, and so they were in the hallway, and they wouldn't let them in Peter's room, and so they were waiting outside, and me and my husband had to go out to them and tell them that, their brother had died, and it was just such a hard thing. They all started screaming, and they were so inconsolable. One daughter, she fainted. One of our sons threw up. They were all just crying, and they couldn't believe it. And then another really hard thing that happened was after they let them come in the room, and we were holding Peter, we were holding his body, and the doctor who had been the critical care doctor, the one who had been taking care of him all that day, asked if he could speak to our children. And he gave this just really kind of creepy talk. Now, looking back at it, it wasn't helpful at all. It really showed his, frame of mind and his beliefs. And he said to them, I know this is hard for you now. And they were all just crying as he was speaking. And he said, but things are going to be easier for your family after you get over this. It's hard now, but as time goes on, things will be easier for your family. And he said that he understood how they felt because he had a brother with special needs that had died. And it was just, very telling to us, that he really did believe Peter was a burden to our family, and telling the kids that, things were going to be easier now that he was gone. And that wasn't the case, Our family has suffered greatly, and the children, especially the 4 that were up there at that time. It was very traumatic, and I think some of them still deal with the trauma of that. And it was just a very, very, very hard thing. And then, of course, a few days later after that, we found out that the autopsy said that he bled to death. And so that was just, more trauma. I guess the only thing I can say that has gotten us through this is our faith in God and our knowledge that we know where Peter is. We know he's in heaven and that he's praying for us. But things were just made a lot more difficult for our family than they needed to be.
And Mary, when you talked about how the doctor himself, grew up with a special needs sibling, it makes me wonder if he could have reacted that way out of guilt.
Well, the funny thing is we found out a few years later after Peter's death that was not true. He never had a child with special needs, a brother with special needs. He did have a brother that died, but that brother died in a car accident. We found that out from a mutual acquaintance who knew this doctor. So I don't know if he was just saying that to try to connect with our kids, but the fact was his brother did not have special needs. His brother did die, but it was in a car accident. So that's what we found out later. So,
I'm sorry, Mary, that happened. I know that had to make a tough situation even tougher. Mary, thank you again for joining us today. And while I know it must be extremely painful for you to relive what happened, I'm so grateful that you shared Peter's story with us. It's so beneficial for parents who are facing a similar situation to know that Prenatal Partners for Life exists to support them and help them protect their children's lives. Also, you have given all of us information that will enable Halo to help prevent something like your experience happening to someone else. And Mary, I wanted to ask one final question. Can you share how people can get a hold of Prenatal Partners for Life?
Sure. We have a website. They can contact us through the website, www.prenatalpartnersforlife.org, or they can call at 763-772-3868. So those are two ways they can reach us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. And I also wanted to let our listeners know that you can contact HALO by calling the HALO helpline. That number is 888-221-HALO. And again, that number is 888-221-HALO. Thanks for listening today.